Welcome to this Arnold Culliford knitwear tutorial on catching floats in your stranded colourwork when you're holding one yarn in each hand. This tutorial is part of our Confident Knitting series, 12 projects to teach you 12 new techniques from 12 of the world's best knitting designers. This is Janette Budge's beautiful Variance Hat, and I'm going to use this design while I demonstrate how to catch in your floats on the wrong side of your work. So what is a float and why do they matter? When you're knitting a stranded colourwork design, you're using the colours that you're working with all the way along the row, and that means that you'll work a few stitches in one colour and then a few stitches in another colour, and you will carry the yarn that you're not using along the wrong side of the work. And where you're carrying the yarn creates what we call floats, and these are these strands of yarn at the wrong side. How you strand your floats is going to have a big impact on how your project looks on the right side of the fabric. So obviously on the hat here, the floats have been carried along with just the right tension so that the stitches on the front of the fabric are nice and smooth and the floats aren't causing any distortion in the fabric. Here we've knitted a couple of samples to show you what can happen. Obviously this is very exaggerated and you may just find that you're getting a little bit of this. So on this sample, on this swatch, the strands have been carried too tightly, and I don't know if you can see there, but it's really created a bit of a lump on the right side of the fabric, and those are repeated across the work. And those are happening because the strands at the back here are too tight, so not enough yarn has been left to carry for the width of the stitches, and so the floats are actually puckering the right side of the fabric, and it makes the whole thing very tight and lumpy on the right side. So that's what it looks like if your strands are too tight. And if your strands are too loose, you essentially get the opposite problem. So first of all, the tension is going to be very loose, but also you're going to have these floats at the back of the work that are really much too loose and things are going to catch in them, and also they can end up making the stitches on the right side of the fabric really uneven because that excess yarn at the back can wiggle around and find its way into the stitches. So as you're knitting stranded colourwork, you're looking for the floats to be just the right length so that they lie flat, not loose like that and not tight like those, but just nice and flat on the wrong side of the work. So the question is, how many stitches do you strand your yarn behind before you catch it in? So you don't want the floats on the wrong side of your work to be too long, because if you go for too many stitches between catching them in, then you can end up with some difficulties. So let me give you some examples of that. If you're knitting for a small child who has small fingers, then mittens and things are going to need you to catch in your yarn fairly regularly so that they're not going to get, the floats aren't going to get caught in a little finger at the back of the fabric. However, if you're knitting something like a cushion cover where the wrong side of the fabric isn't going to get handled, then you can leave your floats for a bit longer because you have a bit of a balance to work out here. When you catch your yarn in at the wrong side of the work, it can, if you do it a lot, lead to your fabric being less even. So you get the most even fabric if you just strand your yarn, but when it gets too long, sometimes you have to catch it in for practical reasons. And you'll find that this is a subject of much debate between different knitters because everybody has their own preference around how many stitches they will strand their yarn behind. So here are my rules of thumb. It depends on what the item's being used for. So as I've explained, for something that's going to get a lot of handling, maybe with little fingers, you don't want long floats. But if it's going somewhere that won't be touched, then longer floats isn't so much of a problem. The thickness of the yarn also comes into play. The thinner the yarn, the smaller the stitches are, and therefore the more stitches you can strand a float behind without it becoming a problem. So in a 4-ply yarn, you could strand behind a lot more stitches than you would do if it was an Aran weight yarn. Obviously 8 stitches in a 4-ply yarn is quite a short stretch. 8 stitches in an Aran weight yarn is going to be much more, so you probably would want to catch in more frequently in a thicker yarn. And then finally, the fibre content makes a big difference too. If you're using a sticky wool, like this lovely Shetland wool that we've used for this hat, then you'll find that the floats will quite quickly start to felt in to the rear of the work. And you may have noticed earlier when I was trying to show you these floats, actually I have to work a bit to peel them off the surface of the fabric, because already they're starting to just felt in slightly at the back of the work. It's not felting in a bad way, this is just the fibres kind of hooked together, and so the floats aren't moving around. Whereas if this was a cotton yarn or something slippery like a silk, then obviously the floats wouldn't felt into each other and they'd be much more movable. So with a slippery yarn, I wouldn't carry for nearly as many stitches as I would in a Shetland wool, for example. So for a hat in a 4-ply sticky wool, like Janette's Variance Hat, then I would happily strand the yarn behind 6 or 7 stitches without any difficulty. And then if it was a stretch longer in one colour, then I would probably catch in the yarn in the middle of that section, just so that the float on the wrong side wasn't too long. And so having decided that we are going to catch in our yarn not in use behind some of the stitches, then there's one last thing to bear in mind, and that's that you don't really want to catch in behind stitches in the same column on consecutive rows, and that just is because you can start to get a little bit of peep through. So here's a close-in view, and the pink yarn has been caught in behind the green yarn in this section, and it's not massively obvious, but if you have a look in here, you can see here that the pink yarn is peeping through behind that green stitch. And actually it is fairly noticeable there because it's been caught in behind this stitch and the one above it on consecutive rows. So you can see the pink there is peeking through, and again up the top here, if you catch in on consecutive rows, you can see there's quite a lot of pink there showing between the green in here, and that wouldn't happen nearly as noticeably if instead of catching behind the same stitch one row after the other, you caught it behind this stitch here and the next door one on the next round, and then maybe went back. If you just vary where the yarn's being caught at the wrong side, here you can see how it looks at the wrong side, that's the catch. So the pink yarn, instead of going all the way across, is caught behind the green. So just try to avoid catching behind the same stitch in a column. This is how I hold my yarns when I'm working stranded colourwork with one yarn in each hand. I have the background colour over my right index finger, and I have the pattern colour over my left index finger. And then when I'm working with the pattern colour, I work using what's sometimes called the continental or picking method, where the right needle tip scoops the yarn off the left finger. And then when I need to work the background colour, I work using the English or throwing method, or flicking, sometimes called flicking, with my right hand. And in doing so, I can keep both of the yarns from getting tangled. They are held consistently so that the background floats are always above the pattern colour floats. I'm going to show you now how to catch in the pattern colour behind a stretch of background stitches. So the first thing to do is to work roughly half of your stretch of stitches in your background colour. You're then going to insert your needle tip into the next stitch, and instead of just working with the background colour as normal, the first thing you're going to do is bring your index finger holding the pattern colour towards you. You're just rocking it up. And now when we work the background colour stitch, that pattern colour has got caught behind the background colour, and we can complete the stitch and then return the pattern colour to its normal position, which is behind. And if we continue to work now, you'll see that the pink yarn has been caught in behind the green yarn stitch in the middle there. Just show you that one more time. So you stick your needle in as if to work, don't knit straight away, just rock that pattern colour towards you, then knit the background colour stitch as normal and drop the pattern colour back to its normal position. And on you go. I'm now going to show you how to catch the background colour behind a stretch of pattern colour stitches. So the first step is again to knit roughly half of your stretch of pattern colour stitches. You're then going to insert your needle tip as if to work the next stitch, but instead of just immediately picking the pattern colour, you're going to wrap the background colour around the needle tip as if to knit. You're then going to wrap your pattern colour around the needle tip, or pick that yarn up. But then before you pull the loop through, you're going to unwrap the background colour. So now you've only got the pattern colour over your needle tip, and you can pull it through to complete the stitch. And the green background yarn is now caught in behind that stitch. And you can continue on your way. Let's catch in behind another stitch just to show you again. So needle tip in, wrap the background yarn around, pick up the pattern yarn, unwrap the background yarn and pull your stitch through. And that just catches the pattern colour yarn in neatly at the wrong side of the work. So instead of having a strand of green background colour yarn that goes behind all of those stitches and just hangs free, it's caught in here and here and will stay a little bit more under control. I do hope that you've found it helpful to find out all about floats in stranded colourwork and to see a way of catching them in without interrupting the flow of your knitting. This tutorial was part of our Confident Knitting series. We're able to keep all of our video tutorials freely accessible and without any adverts thanks to the enormous support of our customers. You can find out more about Confident Knitting as well as all of the books and yarns that we sell to help you grow your techniques and skills in your knitting by clicking the link up top here to head over to our website. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel with the button in the bottom right hand corner here, and that'll ensure that you know when we release our next video tutorial. Thanks ever so much for watching. Bye bye.